director?
How did I get to be the director? It's not very exciting. I was boarding there at the time doing a good job, so Butch liked what I was doing, so he moved me into the position to do it. So, and we've been on a series of them for a while now, so.
Well, what is the directing process like for this project? So, like, did you do a lot of one-on-one time with them in the booth, or were you directing over Zoom, or?
We're actually, we did the recordings before COVID, and then once we started doing the boards, just a couple of weeks in, we went straight into the COVID lockdown. So that was a huge challenge for us through the process. It took a lot of people a lot of time to get used to working from home. We had some people that were at first having trouble, and of course as it was like changing, people were like, oh, this might last longer, this might be more, and it got worse. Like a lot of people struggled for a while to get into the process. So a lot of my process was trying to help people work their way through it while I myself was working my way through it, you know. So it was a big challenge to try and work our way and keep all the board artists, you know, working as best they can in that situation under the pressures they were. The voice acting was well before that, so, and we didn't really even have news of like what was going to go on with COVID before that. So it's usually me and Butch in the booth with them actually in the booth, and we usually direct through that way. So it was really fun because you're starting to pre-imagine what you're going to see after the script into the voice acting. You start hearing the voices. It starts to develop where we're going to go with it and how the tone of the story is going to be. We often make changes right there on the spot of like, no, that's not quite right. We need more of this, because the story starts telling itself and you just start reading for it. So,
what can you tell us about the story? Like, how does this compare to like past Green Lantern movies or shows?
It was one of the things that probably got me the most excited about it. Was like kind of like some of the inspiration we were drawing from for it was like Apocalypse Now was a lot of it. Like we're feeling like this is a very dark story that this guy's going through. He's been through these really horrible experiences and really a sense of like touching on PTSD for him. And what does that mean that when now he's asked to do something again? You know, and it parallels, but it's not the same thing. Like how he handles it versus how the guy in Apocalypse Now handled it are two different things. But it was kind of a superhero's version of like dealing with that other people could look to and enjoy.
And so you picked John Stewart specifically for that story, or what made you go with John? He's personally my favorite Green Lantern, so I was very excited.
Well, I think a Green Lantern story was due for a while for that. Butch had made and the guys who wrote it had made the decision of who they were going to go with, but I was super excited to do it because I grew up with both versions of them, but I loved Bruce Timm's version of the Justice League as we went through, and it was really exciting to be able to tell a story that I felt like he wasn't explored enough, definitely not in Justice League. And now to have an opportunity to tell it a little bit more of his story was super exciting. And like, we get to do something with that here from where we are. So I was super excited about it. So, yeah.
So I'm curious, you following up on one of the earlier questions, you talked about the challenges of directing animation and stuff. Yep. So you start with the voice recording. Mm-hmm. You start to, and by that time, I'm guessing the artwork's being put together, it's being assembled.
Yeah.
So what would you say personally is your biggest challenge? Is it making sure all the artwork matches up to what you need? And I'm just curious where the revision process begins. Like if you say, this audio's not good enough, or this animation isn't quite what we're looking for.
Right. So the process generally is we have a couple of drafts that come in. So there's an outline that's done first. They consider who they're going to do, and they come in with an outline. After the outline's done, we go through a couple of drafts, and I get to see those drafts. I don't get to make a decision on what they're doing or who the story's going, but once I start getting into the drafts, I can chime in on a few things that I think, okay, this will work, that probably won't work when we get to the boards. My job is to sometimes assess those things like, oh, that's going to be too big and too expensive to do that aim or what we're doing, or it doesn't quite feel like him. There were a couple of things we pulled where like that doesn't feel quite right for this character, for the story that we're trying to tell, so we'll often pull some of that stuff out. Or sometimes it's too long, we have to cut pages to make sure it's get into something manageable as we go along. Once we do that, we get a final draft. once we do the final draft, we do some recording. We record all the voices, and we have a pretty good idea of like what each character has to do, or what kind of attitude they have, or what place they play in there, and what's their motivation and how they decide to do stuff. And that influences their voice, like how we want them to portray the character. Once we've done that, then we take those voice recordings and we bring them to the board artists. They get the script and say, okay, we give them instructions like, okay, here's what we're aiming for here, here's what we're aiming for, and we go through the whole script with each one of the guys to have them build out what we're looking for. Once we get it back, I start going through revisions, saying, oh, that doesn't make sense, this makes sense, that's good, that needs some revisions, and we go for many weeks of trying to revise as we go through that until we get to the animatic that does that. The art decisions that are done, like character design, background design, I'll often say if there's a problem story-wise that's wrong with it, if like I can't do it, but Butch makes all those decisions on the art and look and the actual aim. He's one of the producers that makes those decisions.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there a moment, like non-spoiler moment, that when you saw it kind of complete, that you're really proud of?
A moment within it?
Yeah, in the movie, like without like spoiling the ending or anything major.
I think for me, for how big this story was, the pacing was right for what the time that we had. We had limited time in such a big story. We're like, okay, this has to go along at a certain pace in order for us to get the story complete and feel like John's story had weight. So the story when we first got it was close to 100 pages. We usually want it to be 70, so there was a lot we had to pull that was building a lot of stuff in order to get within that runtime. So as we were working through it, me watching it, there was two things. One, I felt like looking at it, the way John's attitude and his reaction to what was going on and his resistance at first made perfect sense in the kind of life he did. And that I feel like when we finally, he accepts what his mission is or what he's going to be, it's when we pull the clothes off and he accepts that part of him. I think that's the moment that people in the audience will say, okay, this is Jon Stewart and this is what he's doing. And he's, what's the word for it? Embracing it.
Is there anything you had to cut that you were like, oh, I would like to keep this in, or maybe something you could use later?
That was a while ago. That was 2 years ago. I'm trying to think of anything.
Fair. That is so fair.
I think some of the fight, we wanted a bit more on the end there, even though it was great, like I think where it came out, but I wanted to really stretch out that battle between Hal and Jon Stewart. I think we could have really been meaty with that if we really had a chance to, with that film length, but we didn't. So I think it came out great the way it did. So.
What's the process like directing in a booth with a voice actor? How is that different to, for the actors working with the director on a set? Do you find that there's a challenge there for you in that relationship?
It can be. If you don't have a lot of experience doing it, at first I think for some people it's knowing when you need to chime in versus not knowing and letting the voice actor find where they want to go with it and seeing how much they can contribute. Some people will say, this is what I want no matter what. Some people will just let them go, and probably not the best idea, but having the balance between the two is probably the biggest challenge, is knowing when to let them have what they bring to it and balancing between that and what you need. And I think you get the best performances when you do that versus just telling them exactly what you want or just letting them go, because it's a collaboration, and I think that works best.
And with these guys, obviously they're big names. Did you find that they were amenable to that balance?
I think so. I think I think anybody would appreciate, like, we're all trying to do our best job, and I think the actors from their point of view they want the same thing. It's like, what the best performance I can get out of this? If the director and the producer can give me some aim on that, they don't feel like they're going to flail or they totally went in the wrong direction. I think it is important from both ends that it's right, because I think you get the best result that way. Animation being a very collaborative
Yeah.
kind of medium. I think it's important when you bring voice actors that they understand that, and vice versa with the director and producer.
Were you involved in casting this? Or?
No, I'm super happy with who we got though.
Yeah, it's a pretty good cast.
Yeah, it was a great cast, and I think that was one of the things. Like watching it, going back, I'm like, wow, these were great choices, really, really good choices. So, gotta give Butch all the credit for that.
Yeah, I think we went over, but which is fine.
That's fine.